Hey, hello, and welcome to the Content Advantage, a talk show about content for content professionals. I'm Scott Abel, and joining me today is my co-host, Megan Gilhooly. Megan, are you on the line? Are you muted? Maybe. Unmuted now?
There we go.
Oh, yay, awesome.
It's like it's my first time.
Excellent. Where are you broadcasting from today?
How are you, Scott?
I'm good, thank you. Where are you at today?
I am actually in Cleveland. I'm here for my first in-person conference in 2 years, and I'm very excited.
Awesome. It sounds like a content marketing world adventure.
Yes, it is.
Well,
yes.
Good luck and enjoy. I know it's been a long
you.
time. All right, let's kick this off and jump in and meet our presenter today.
You bet. All right. So I am very happy to introduce our amazing guest, Carolyn Swift-Muschott.
Hi, Carolyn.
Who is the Senior Director of Software Engineering at Cengage Group. And we're going to talk a little bit about that title later. But thanks for joining us, Carolyn. How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
And where are you calling in from?
I am calling in from Commerce, Michigan. It's outside of Detroit. And it's a nice sunny day out here today.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Excellent. Are you right on the lake?
Pardon?
Are you right on the lake?
I am actually, yes, I am on a lake. So
you two are much closer than everybody else on the show, I think, today.
That's true.
I'm in the desert in Palm Springs, so I'm as far away as you can get. All right, a few things for our audience members who might be new to the Bright Talk platform. Let me tell you a few things about the show. First, today's show is being recorded, which means that you can come back at any time if you need to leave early and just return to the same URL that you're using to watch today's live show. And you'll see that it'll become a recording about 30 minutes after the show ends today. That recorded link will be emailed to you as well as a reminder, so you can share it with others and watch it whenever it's convenient for you. Also, we don't have access to your camera or your microphone, so we can't see or hear you, so you don't have to worry about that. And you can ask a question of Carolyn or myself or Megan at any time by using the Ask the Questions tab located underneath your webinar viewing panel. Clicking that button opens up a little text-based window that allows you to submit a text question to us. Keep in mind, we won't be able to submit an answer back through the text window, but we will queue up as many questions as possible and ask them with the time that we have available on today's show. And speaking of today's show, you can access additional content, including handouts and content provided by our software sponsor today of the show, Zoomin software, and some contact information for all the people on the show in the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel. All right, without further ado, let's get started, Megan.
Awesome. All right. So, Carolyn, we want to hear a little bit about you. Can you tell us about the subject of today's show and how you are related to that with your work at Cengage?
Sure. So Cengage Group is a major publisher and ed tech company, and I actually work for a company, a subsidiary, if you will, of it, a business unit of it called Gale. And Gale is a provider of research and learning resources to libraries and schools. And so in the context of that, we obviously have a huge content component. Our major initiative is mission is to make sure that we connect students and educators and researchers with the content that they need. So our role is really critical in that entire pipeline of facilitating the user experience with our products. And so within the context of our business, what I do and my team does is make sure that we have content that's in the right format and has the right metadata to support customer needs, and that it actually functions in the platforms on which it's presented.
And Carolyn, could you help the audience members who might not be familiar with your company's content understand the kinds of deliverables that you and your teams are responsible for?
Sure. So we actually, within Gale, all of our content is really reference content, but there are several different flavors of it. So some of that is periodical content. So the New York Times or major publications, we have licensed content from various providers and make it available to users in a different way, and kind of also make that content available to students and to do research projects. But we also have a lot of our proprietary content is focused on K-12 and academic space where we support research that they may be doing at any level of education. We also have some business products, and we also have my personal favorite is we make historical archive content available that once was only available by traveling to a particular institution and putting on white gloves and looking at it. We actually make that digitally available.
That's super cool.
Cool. Very cool.
Mm-hmm. It's really an exciting field to work in.
I like it because it seems like you get to take advantage of archival content and current event content and bring it together in a way that's useful to the user. But it must be a lot of complicated content gymnastics to make that happen as well.
Yeah, it can be. As you can imagine when you're dealing with, for example, a third-party partner who provides some really high-quality content and is used to working in a digital environment, the way in which that content is made available to us is typically in a really well-structured format, and it's kind of ready to go, and we just have to map it into our system, right? It's basically a matter of making sure that we know this is their title field, and it needs to end up in the title field in this application. But then you also end up with cases where we're working with hard copies in an archive, and we have an entire group that manages the capture of that content. It's managing, capturing the images, making sure that the text is searchable, and that we have metadata associated with that content to make it easier to find for somebody who, may not be familiar with that content or how it's organized in an archive.
Got it. So, Carolyn, you clearly work in the field of content. So I want to talk about this title. When we first reached out to you, I believe that your title was Director of Content Engineering. And since then it's been changed to Senior Director of Software Engineering, which is a pretty big change in my mind. Can you talk to us about how that came about?
Yeah, so yes, I have led the content engineering organization at Gale for a number of years. We have actually been in different parts of the company over the years too. We were in a kind of a shared services group that supported a lot of different areas of the business. We've been in that case, we were somewhat more closely aligned with editorial or content development. And then in the last, I'm trying to think, probably 6 or 7 years, we've been actually part of the technology organization. And I think there are benefits and drawbacks to both of those, because obviously it was very useful and helpful to be part of the content development, the same organization that content development was a part of, and it made it a little bit easier to pair. That being said, I think the reason that we ultimately, as a business, moved content engineering into the technology organization is because it's becoming an increasing, we have an increasingly higher expectation of the technical aptitude of our content engineering organization. In order to, first of all, make sure that they understand the technologies that are being used upstream and downstream from that team. And so they can communicate effectively with the folks who are making this content available in a user interface and through databases. But also, it's because the expectation of our team is higher. We have computer programmers, we have analysts, data analysts, what we call content engineering analysts, and content engineers, all as part of our group. And so it made a lot of sense to align with technology. And so to really quickly answer your point about the software engineering title, we also have built a software engineering team specifically focused on supporting, developing and supporting content systems. So the systems that allow for the day-to-day throughput of content and automating those processes as much as possible. And so it was in that realm that I really got a lot of experience managing a software engineering team. And recently, the head of our technology organization had to take on broader responsibilities. And so I think this was a recognition that not only is content engineering a highly technical group, but that my group and maybe my experience lent itself to overseeing the overall software engineering organization.
That's very cool. What a path.
That's super cool. Hey, I've got a question for you, but it's 3 parts. And I wanted to see if you could take them in chunks. First, for people who might not understand exactly what you mean when you say content engineering, could you talk to us briefly about what is content engineering to you, and how could you explain it in a way that our audience members might be able to kind of not be overwhelmed with more jargon?
Yeah. It's funny because whenever I have to explain myself outside of the context of my job, so when I'm going to a dinner party or a family event and somebody's asking what I do, I realize really quickly I have to actually make sure I can use words that everybody else would understand. So I stopped using terms like XML and stuff like that. The way I actually look at it and the way I describe it is that my job is to make sure that the content we create is structured in a way that an application can understand. And that, to me, it's as simple as that, really. Obviously, there's the devils are in the details, but that's how I describe it to other people.
Why do you think Cengage and your organization in general felt compelled to invest in this? Because we talk about it a lot, and some companies still have no idea what they're doing in the content engineering realm. And what capabilities do you think the company was hoping to gain from adopting this approach?
So the interesting thing is we actually were a content engineering organization before the term content engineer came into the vernacular in the content world. So because we didn't call ourselves that, though. We were called standards implementation managers here. And so it was, so it was a mouthful. We don't believe in short titles here, actually. So it was Standards Implementation Manager, or SIMS, which always I thought was funny because of the video game SimCity.
Of course.
We were a group that was created in order to bridge the gap between content development and software engineering. And it was supposed to be a group of folks that understood how to bridge the gap between how content needed to be structured and tagged, what metadata was needed, and what standardization and normalization had to happen to that content to actually make it function effectively for our users in a digital environment. And also to understand, we actually have a lot of content engineers who came from content strategy and development roles, because it's really important that you not only have that technical bent, but that you understand what it takes to develop content, because it's something that, there's a lot of requirements related to presentation and display and what the points that you're trying to get across and how best to convey them. That's really important to understand, not just the technical aspect of it, but really what we're trying to, how we're trying to present our content to users.
That's really interesting. With these folks who are content engineers, do you typically look for the tech skills first and then teach the content skills, or do you look for the content skills and teach the tech skills?
That's an interesting question. Actually, I would say this is not intended as a cop-out answer, but both. And what I mean by that is there's a minimum level of technical skill that you need to have, but it doesn't necessarily mean, at least in our organization, but it doesn't necessarily mean you need to be a computer programmer or a coder right out of the gate. But you do need to be able to understand. There's some people that just may struggle to comprehend relational database concepts or XML and various other structured formats. So you need to make sure that folks actually have that foundational knowledge. But beyond that, I actually, if I feel that somebody has the ability has demonstrated an aptitude for technical concepts in their day-to-day job, I will actually favor someone that has communication skills and leadership skills and can be trained on the technical things over the opposing perspective. And the reason for that is because we interact with so many different teams, and you have to know how to communicate with people who have completely different backgrounds than your own.
Yes.
And if you can't get past that hurdle, it doesn't matter how much you know, you're going to fail right out of the gate in terms of trying to bring teams together and trying to execute on the project or, effort that you've been embarking.
What a great observation. Thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes people are confused about why leaders select the people that they do. But it seems to me that communication hurdle is that's the key point. If you can't get past that, everything else is kind of a moot point.
Yeah. And I will say, we also, the reason I said both is because I will say we also sometimes look for, there's obviously for hiring someone, they have to meet the minimum requirements for the position. Yeah. But the other thing is, if I just hired somebody that had one skill set they're really strong on, then the next person I'm looking for may actually balance the team out, may have a different skill set or maybe stronger in one area than another. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Balancing the team is huge. You can't expect everybody to have all of the skills and be strong at all of the things, but as long as you have enough people with strengths in enough different areas, that creates a lot of diversity on the team that makes a stronger team. That's awesome. I love that.
And Megan, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good, because I can't control my browser at this minute. Apologies to audience members. We're using some software that changed over the weekend, and we're experiencing the changes live. And my mouse won't move. So I'm going to try to restart here and rejoin you in a second. Actually, for whatever reason, it came back on again. And now I apparently can control the screen again. Okay, so I won't disappear. I won't disappear for a minute. I will just encourage Megan that I think the next question we were going to talk about was bringing together these areas of the company.
Yes.
I think that was your point. But I was also wondering when you're asking Carolyn about this, if you might share your thoughts on it as well, because it seems like that's something that companies have to do all the time. We just don't talk about it.
Yes, absolutely. So really what I wanted to know is how, when you think about editorial and software development and product management, you're kind of bringing all of these together because content is your product. You're also developing it from a very technical standpoint. And of course, you always need editorial. So what's the goal of bringing these three areas together in your company? And how do they work together? And where are sort of those synergies?
So the goal, I would say, in bringing all of those teams together is because I'm sure this is true of any business that has a web presence, that you want to make sure that whatever content you make available on your customer-facing or your public-facing site, it might be that your content is just within your marketing organization and not your core product. In my company's case, it's actually also our core product. So, but regardless, in any case where you have content that you want to present to your users, it's vitally important to make sure that it presents well and that you don't lose the impact of that content because of the way it's presented or because of the making it difficult for a user to get access to it to begin with or find it. And so in the case of our business, it's the reason, the goal that we have is to make sure that our content strategy and development folks are able to present their content without having to struggle with the format that they're having to capture it in, without having to struggle with technical issues and trying to experiment with getting it actually to look the way they want on the product. And also that we deal with a high volume of content. So we want to make sure that whatever content we're producing, that we can have a repeatable workflow that automates as many parts of that process as possible. And the reasons for that are not only certainly to make it easier for the people who are producing the content, either the authors that we work with or the editorial staff who are, creating an experience, a curated experience for our customers. But it's also to make sure the automation also is so important because it avoids inconsistencies in the content that can trip the application up, because most of our content is available in a user interface. We are heavily digital at this point, and a large portion of what we produce is presented in a web app. And so it's really important that there's consistency, so that, for example, if you provide a limiter or a filter for a user, that when they're using those, they don't end up with 3 variations of the same word in the list of possible, selections, and that they understand and it's intuitive to them how to gain access to the content. And when they run a search on a topic or a subject, that they get back results that they expect. So really, that's our goal.
That's awesome. And it's such a big issue right now, right? The fact that you're bringing all of these different teams sort of together under one roof is awesome. I see a lot of times you have multiple different content silos, and each silo has their own taxonomy, their own metadata, their own search bar.
Their own baggage.
That might be the best customer experience for that one search bar or that one portal, but it's not the best overall customer experience, right? So it sounds like you're really tackling this with a 360 view, which is just amazing. I love it.
And I'm sure, even before I was part of this organization, and I've been here, I'm a boomerang. I actually worked here in content strategy and development long ago. So I've seen some of the progression, but yeah, it's, I'm sure long ago, and even in some of my older, my more distant past with Gale, I've seen the progression toward all of the standardization, because previously we would create a product and it would be on its own unique platform and its own unique structure and its own tagging. And I've seen the progression of that. And then fortunately, I've had the good fortune of being able to contribute to the evolution toward where we are now as well. So yes, it's extremely important to consider those things. But I did want to say one thing. As much as we have done a great job as a business of standardizing and using, we have our own proprietary vocabulary, controlled vocabulary that we use, as well as some external taxonomies. The challenge we now have is that we're using those for all of our markets. And we have, kids in elementary school trying to access the same content as academics. And we have to be really recognize how we take the terms that we use and the way in which we tag the content and make it so that it works well for all of those audiences. And so that's our challenge now.
What type of resistance might someone who has a similar situation to you, maybe they're brought into an organization and asked to bring people together, and they've decided that content engineering is one way to do it. What kind of resistance might you encounter or you expect to encounter when you're trying to introduce this concept to people that haven't been operating this way necessarily?
Yeah, what I've noticed is I was fortunate enough to have joined the team when it was called Standards Implementation Management. So I didn't actually have to build the case for creating this team. It was more about changing its branding. We want to make it a little simpler for people to understand by changing our name and kind of going through walk through with the organization about what our focus is and making sure that evolves. But what I can tell you is that even in the context, even having already been on this team and then having to build the software engineering team that I mentioned to support internal content systems, I had a very similar challenge to what one might find if they had to create a content engineering team from scratch.
Yeah, sure.
And what I learned from that process is that, first of all, you need to speak in terms of business value, not in terms of technical jargon. So obviously, if somebody has a question about the technical aspects of the role, you have to be prepared to speak to those. But really, when you're trying to make a business case for staffing up a new team, you need to really make sure that you can outline the business, the value proposition for what you're doing and how that ties to an experience for customers, how that improves the customer experience, and how that relates to business objectives. And the other thing that I learned in building a team, a new team from scratch, was that you need to make sure that you're going in, and when you're trying to establish a new team, that you're thinking about all of the teams you're going to be interacting with, and that you connect the dots with those teams before you actually implement the new team. Meaning, if you're starting a content engineering team from scratch, you don't just say, hey, I want to create this content engineering team. You make the business case for it, and then you hire the people and then plop them down in the organization. It means that you have to, before you ever do any of those things, you have to talk to all of the groups that will be stakeholders, internal customers, or colleagues of yours, depending on your work, and really get a handle on the problem you're trying to solve and what problems they're trying to solve. Because if you just inject that team without buy-in from the other teams that you need to work with, it's not going to work very well. It's going to be really painful. So think about the problems that you can solve, not only the gaps that you're trying to fill, but how they relate to the problems that those other teams you're working with are going to need to solve. And I think those two, leading with those two things will really make you much more successful.
Thank you for that.
That's really, really good advice. We've heard that the first one we've heard a couple times very recently. In fact, I remember Deb Matani said a very similar thing, that you have to speak business language, not your funny XML standards language, to your executives. So that totally makes sense. I do have a couple follow-up questions. One is, there's oftentimes a difference depending on the organization, and maybe this is more of a comment than a question, but some organizations really value customer experience and they want to do what's right for the customer, right? I worked at Amazon. It was all about that. It didn't matter how much more it cost. If it was better for the customer, we did it. Then there's other companies that really are run on revenue. And so speaking to their bottom line, or whether it's how you're going to add to revenue or how you're going to reduce cost, might be more effective. Have you found that you've had to think about how your company reacts to those two different values? Or do you find that typically you can kind of cover all of it in one business case?
Interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, I do think that it is definitely dependent upon the business that you're a part of. The company that I work for really focuses on the customer experience. And so I wouldn't say, probably very few businesses at the end of the day don't care about revenue. But I do think there are companies that choose how they want to make that revenue, right? And how they think they're going to, how they feel they can best leverage their product to support customer needs. And that's something that's really emphasized in our organization. So I personally would not go forward with a business case that didn't mention how it will impact customers positively. I do bring both, though. I bring the revenue thing, and that's not only because it's partially about whatever company culture you're part of, but because even internal to a company, you have people in different functions. So we have a finance organization like anyone else, any other business, and they're still going to want to know the answers to those questions about how does this, if we're going to invest in this, what will it, what value will it bring to the business as well as the customers? And you have folks in sales organizations who have their own set of questions. So that's why I always bring both to the table, because I think it's natural to expect that people from different functional parts of the organization are going to have different questions.
This seems like a good time to have a word from our sponsor. And Megan, could you tell our audience a little bit about Zoomin software and your connection to today's topic?
Yes, absolutely. So Zoomin is a platform that ingests product content from any source, no matter how it was created or published. It can be structured, unstructured, doesn't matter. And then we deliver it into various places, including a documentation portal, inside your community, inside your customer service site, or even inside your web-based product itself. And this way, it makes it easy for your customers to find the answers they want, no matter what content silo the answers are coming from. And, hopefully adds to that customer experience that we were just talking about.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that with us. And for the audience members that are interested in learning more about Zoomin software, you can do so by checking them out on the web at zoominsoftware.com, or you can look in the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel, and there's some links and some information there about the company and the software that they provide as well. All right, so back to the show. Carolyn, I had a question for you about elevating individual members of your team. So Megan and I love to talk about how leaders are elevating people on their teams to give them kind of showcase their value and to help them with their careers. Can you share some ideas with our audience about how they might be able to elevate individual members of their content teams?
Yeah. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I hope I do generally a good job at this, but every single time I turn around, I just see the great things that people are doing in my organization, and I think of 20 other things that I haven't had a chance to do or that I want to do.
It's a journey. It's a
You're
journey.
not alone.
It's a journey. But I would say, the basic thing is you want to make sure, especially as I mentioned, we're aligned with the technology organization. You want to make sure that folks have every opportunity to continue to develop their technical skill set. So that's kind of like the baseline or table stakes, if you will, with regard to developing folks in this particular field. If you ask me, that's the bare minimum that you can do. But obviously that means, enabling them to participate in conferences or technical training. And I also ask, I do ask every person on my team when we periodically, several times a year, what they're interested in doing. So it's not just, we talk about what skills we want to ramp up in our teams, but also what direction people are interested in going in, because it's very difficult to hire people with these skill sets. Okay. And if you're not thinking about, how to not only get them the training they need to do their jobs well and feel good about the job they're currently doing, but that they feel like they're invested in, then you're going to have a retention problem. And it's so important to, it's costly and it's a time suck to bring people, bring new people on board, even though it's also always an exciting opportunity to bring new folks in who have, a different background. But I think it's really important to really look at what people are interested in doing. And some of the things we have people working on from a development perspective are not necessarily things that they need to do their current job, but another one in the organization, because we'd rather have folks stay and grow in the organization and be able to tap that expertise from now and again, or to bring somebody else on board to the team as they're rolling out than to have them leave. But the other thing I really do, we try to do, and I want to actually put a renewed focus on this actually at my office, is to do knowledge sharing with the broader technology team. I've had some members of my team over time do presentations to software engineers about how content is made,
Oh, good idea.
Yeah, and vice versa. So we have we have something called Wise Wednesdays at Cengage, and it's Wednesday information sharing experience, I think is what it stands for. Oh,
that's cool.
Yeah, and so people do presentations at lunchtime, and it's optional, but it's something that's been going on for a number of years, and it gives individuals exposure across the organization. They connect with people that they might not have otherwise, and they also get ideas about what they're doing. Somebody might say, "Hey, I've had the same challenge," or what have you. And it also makes sure that folks who are working with them directly understand the universe they're working in and have a little more understanding of it.
I applaud that.
That's awesome.
Woo-hoo,
yes, absolutely. As a former manager of very large content teams, I really appreciate what you said. You have to get to know people, what drives them and what will push them, what will keep them, and what will kind of send them running away the other way, right? So, for example, your Wise Wednesdays, if you're asking somebody to present information there, hopefully that person wants to be presenting information and they feel like that's a great, cool thing for them to do. If, on the other hand, they were scared to death of public speaking, then you may say, well, why don't we send you to Toastmasters, right? Like maybe that's the way for me to support you working on your weaknesses if they are even interested in that. So it's really great that you get to know the people on your team, what drives them, where they want to be in 3 years, so you know what opportunities to put in front of them.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
Awesome. Very cool.
Let's talk briefly about the role of standardization of content and what capabilities that gives us, because you've invested in it. And so I know Cengage uses a lot of standards because you need to be able to drive that content automatically and engineer it for automation. Can you talk to us a little bit about the role of standardization in your content teams?
Yeah. Wow, that's such a huge topic. You could have more than one of these sessions just on it. And we might. But yeah, I mean, when I think of standardization, like I would say the core thing that I think about, or traditionally was expected to think about with regard to standardization in the context of content engineering, was in standardizing content in terms of structure. Mm-hmm. And also in terms of metadata. So it's in structure, are we going to use JSON, SGML, XML, or some other format? Is it going to go into a relational database? And then making sure that there's a schema defined for that database, right? So it could be any of those things, but those are the types of structural things that we want to make sure that we're consistent on. And frankly, if we're not, we'll know right away because it won't load into a platform, or it will, basically be garbage when it's brought up on the screen. But then beyond that, the other standardization that we're really focused on is around controlled vocabularies and taxonomies. And I would love to say that I'm an expert on that, but actually I am fortunate that in our organization, I have access to some great folks internally who oversee an entire team of people that manage our controlled vocabularies and taxonomies. And so that's a big deal, and not every company has the benefit of that. We have a stellar team. So they basically define what vocabularies we need. So we'll have, for example, a named person vocabulary, mm-hmm. or a subject vocabulary, or a geoscope vocabulary. And their goal is to understand how to define that. They have to make sure they have guardrails around like what constitutes a named person. And then they have to decide how we add folks to that list, right? And they are responsible for understanding how to deal with variant names and things like that. And so they're responsible for all of the standardization relative to controlled vocabularies and taxonomy. But then we also have things that are layered on top from outside, and that we really need to be mindful of. So things like accessibility standards, and which are so important to making sure that everyone can access our content, in any way that they want to.
So there's a relevant question from the audience I just wanted to add in here real quick. And that is, so a lot of the things you're talking about, they sort of work with and interact with other terms like information architecture, content strategy, content operations. So where do you sort of see the realm of content engineering beginning and ending in regards to these related practices, was their question.
Wow. That's so interesting. I think in general, I feel like content engineering is responsible for figuring out in our organization, how we've structured it is that content engineers are responsible for understanding what we're trying to achieve for a particular project or a particular initiative. So it might be a broader thing, like making content available in a particular platform or an environment. And they're responsible for understanding what those goals are. And so they understand the what, and they start to develop the overarching how. But they actually tap into, for example, architecture, information architecture. We have a separate function here that manages that, and they're pulled in anytime that a content engineer identifies a case where we don't currently have a model that supports the thing we're trying to do. And so I've described this before, where in our organization, content engineers in the middle, they're basically the person that is the first point of contact when we're trying to figure out how to handle a new initiative that involves content. And then we pull in all of those other areas of expertise based on the needs of that project or that effort. You mentioned information architecture. I've forgotten what the other aspect, what you mentioned.
Content strategy, content operations.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of terms. I mean, you can throw any content term in there, right?
Yes. We look at like information architecture or content architecture as a distinct function that's tapped into by content engineering. Likewise, content strategy. Content strategy to me is more about what we're trying to present to users, not the how we're doing it. So content strategy is about what kind of content we want to provide, how much of it, how many articles or how many books or whatever the case might be, what the reading level it needs to be, like how it needs to be written, how long an article is, or the duration, how long the listening time is for a particular item. And the topical scope of it. To me, that's content strategy, and they are also external in our organization from content engineering.
When you attempt to bring teams together like this and engineer kind of a more automated orchestration of content, did you encounter lessons about maybe the way that content was created, things that needed to change, things like the way that you create content, the tools that you use, or the processes that were involved? In other words, did the kind of looking at the problem help you see other areas that might need to be changed for whatever reason?
Yeah, other areas that might need to be changed within content engineering?
Yes.
Yeah, always.
Good answer.
Very good answer.
When I think about it, I'm like, oh, I don't even know where to start. Yeah, almost always, because our market always evolves, our users always evolve, the technologies we use always evolve. So the internal technologies we use always evolve, and the external technology. So, we integrate with, third-party software as well that, educational institutions might be using or libraries might be using. And so what I would say about that is, I guess initially when I first started to work in content engineering, a lot of what we were still grappling with at that time was we need to really continue to amp up our efforts towards normalization and standardizing, going to a more standardized approach across our organization with regard to how we structure and create content. I think we haven't. There's still areas where we can improve upon that, but we've made great strides. For example, we had individual workflows, authoring and conversion, conversion workflows. What I mean by that is taking content from a format in which it was delivered or authored and converting it to a different XML format or something for delivery to a system. And so we would have unique, every title or every product had its own unique workflow. And so that is not really sustainable over a long period of time. It's very costly. So plus it makes for a different experience for anyone that's trying to move from you working on one of those to the next. So I think initially that was the first thing that we wanted to tackle, right? When at my evolution, when I came into the organization, that was the thing where I would look around and I would say, great, we're doing this well on an individual project basis, but we need to do this at a bigger scale. But I think now when I look at it, some of the things that I think we need to be looking at is, now that we've standardized it, how do we make sure that we're maintaining the standardization and the automation and the centralization of these efforts, but making sure that we can customize the user experience. Like, that's the thing that I think we're really spending a lot of time on.
Is that really about being able to do what you need without breaking the system, sort of thing? Yeah,
it's not insurmountable. It's just about, I mentioned controlled vocabularies. There are scientific terms that an academic will search on, and that's how our content is tagged. But we want a sixth grader to be able to look up something with that same concept and find something for their grade level that relates to that. And it means that we have to put some connection between how we tag our content and how a user is going to actually want to interact with that content.
I think that's really about that customer experience thing, right? You're actually saying these customers are going to have an experience, and it's different between an academic and a juvenile, who's in school trying to learn how to be maybe an academic one day. And that you're right, the complications of library science are not something a fifth grader needs to understand. So that whole taxonomy, you're right, we can have a whole show about how to make taxonomies for college and intermediate students. And maybe you'll have to come back and help us with that, or recommend an expert for us.
Yes.
All right, Megan, I think you've still got a question.
Yeah. Let's talk about your tech stack a little bit. So there's probably a lot going into this. I'm curious about your tools, maybe not just your tech stack, but your tools beyond that, your taxonomy, your content models, your whatever tools it is that you use to make this happen. What does that look like?
So, I knew we would be talking about tech stack to some degree, and there's so much to our tech stack, because there's the customer facing platforms, and then there's the internal tech stack as well, the things that help with our content production, right? I'm going to focus on the content production part of it, since that's really where content engineers spend more of their time. And so really in that realm, we build software. So we build systems internally that have user interfaces that people internal to our organization interact with. And those are generally written in Java. So we're a Java house. But on the back end of those, we use a combination of things. And some of them are supported by databases, relational databases, Oracle databases. Some of them use MarkLogic, which is an XML database technology. So different, little different technology than a relational database. We also use for conversion, so transforming content from one format to another, which we do all the time, because we don't always get to choose what format content's available in. We use Perl or Python, so we have folks who code in those languages, and that's largely what we do for content transform. And then we leverage a lot of XML technologies, so XPath, XQuery, et cetera, for some of the work that we're doing. So I would say, I could list a whole bunch of other things, but really, other aspects of our tech stack, but those are probably the things that we, every single day are interacting with and using.
Best practices are nice and often useful, but it's also important to avoid the mistakes, right, that others have made before you. Can you provide our audience with any advice on what not to do when attempting to adopt a content engineering approach? Was there some aha you had, like, oh, maybe this would be better if we didn't do it this way?
You know what? It sounds like a little bit of repetition, but I would say what not to do is assume the needs of your stakeholders and colleagues. And because I'm saying this because I've done this, and I've also seen other people do this.
I've done it.
You think you know the problem you're trying to solve, and you don't vet that with the people who will be impacted by it. So to me, that's probably the biggest mistake that I think people can make. It's not a technical one out of the gate. It's more about making sure that you are understanding not only the problem you're trying to solve, but the problem that the business needs solved, and how the people around you are going to perceive that role, and what assumptions they may want to make, or maybe may tend to make about what that role is supposed to mean to them and how they're supposed to interact. So, it's really boring, but racy, like figuring out how this organization will implement a content engineering organization, or just an individual content engineer, and making sure that you're understanding you're literally outlining, okay, this person or this team is going to take on these tasks. This is what we're thinking. Does that make sense to all of you? And they're filling these gaps that we don't currently have anyone to support. And are there needs that you would like us to fill, or tasks that we should be shifting over from another part of the organization to this group now that we have them? And obviously that's also a delicate conversation, because that can tread on territorialism at times, right? So anytime that you add a new function to an organization, almost anytime that you add a new function to an organization, that's something that you have to be really mindful of and respectful of, because there are people in that organization that have a lot of expertise already, and you don't want to, ignore that, and you don't want to, you want to take advantage of it, and you want to work with it, not, be at odds with it.
Right.
Exactly. People are the problem, but people are also the biggest part of the solution.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a question that I think it came in a while ago, because you've addressed it. It's actually, I think, 4 questions, and I think you've addressed most of them, but there's one in there that I think is really interesting, and I think maybe draws on some of the stuff that you're talking about. So this person says, how do you connect the business domain model to the conceptual content model to the schema/template machine expression?
Wow.
Do you know what that's referring to? So he or she is talking about content modeling, and how you sort of connect that content model, how all these things interplay, right? The content model, the schema or template machine. So basically the structure that you're talking about, and then the business domain model.
Yeah. We usually work from, I think I know how to answer this question. I think I know what they're asking. We usually, for better or worse, I think this is for the better, we usually work from the outside in. And what I mean by that is, you mentioned 2 things. There's the business model, which also gets translated into a content model. Like, this is what content strategy, this is what we want our content to look like and behave like. And then you have, on the other end, a technology, you have a user interface or a database or something that you're going to send that content to. And in the middle is the content model. And so usually what we do is we first try to understand, what are we trying to build, and what it's supposed to look like, and what is it supposed to behave like. And we're having that conversation on the other end with software engineers, so that we can understand how they're planning on building it. So what technologies are we going to use to facilitate search? How is the content going to be presented, and in what format do you need it sent in? Like, what kind of tagging do you expect to have? And then we actually determine what the structure should be. In a mature organization like ours, we have a structure that's standardized, and we just have to extend it, so it becomes a lot easier. But when I think back, it was like working from the outside, from both of those sides of the fence, and kind of negotiating between the two, and making sure that the software engineers understood what the product and content requirements were. And then talking with the software engineering team about, if we're going to deliver this, what search engine are you going to be using, and how are you building the indexes, and what do you need the document to have if somebody's going to open up a document on our site? What components is it going to have? And it was only after we got those pieces of information down that we actually created the structure, and the structure was really built to focus on those requirements. The important thing to do, though, is you have to realize that your platform of today is not necessarily the platform of tomorrow. So when we do work, when we did develop and continue to extend our current, we use an XML format for our proprietary format, is an XML format, but it's proprietary, and it's well tuned to our platforms, but it also is intended to be generic enough and that it's extensible, and that another system can use it. So, that's, I think, really key when you're starting to embark upon creating a new, content format, that you're thinking about those things as well, that it's extensibility for the future.
It makes a lot of sense given that we talk a lot about XML without saying the word extensible markup language, right?
Yes.
That's the whole purpose.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be extensible. I think we forget about it and we get locked up in our own little world. So thank you for sharing that. It's a great lesson learned.
Yeah, thanks.
Right. So I think there's the person that asked the question because they've now said, thanks for that answer. Are you using a specification like ORM, UML, or a way to quickly communicate the content model to software engineers to build the machine expression? As a content engineer, I'm curious what modeling language you're using. Thanks, Sebastian. Thanks, Sebastian.
Well, I will say, yeah, that's a good question. No, we don't for a variety of reasons. However, we do actually use some modeling, some models for delivery of our content to third parties. So it's not a really straightforward answer, and I don't want to get into I guess the specific details. But no, actually, we have done ours completely from scratch.
Wow. Okay. Well, see, there you go. And some things you do want to do from scratch, and some things are, things that you borrow from others. So it seems like the engineering is also about balancing what you build, what you buy, what you rent, what you get from other people, and how you maintain all that and make them work.
Here's what I will say is we learn a lot from other formats or other.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great comment too. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for being our guest today. I really appreciate it, Carolyn. I know the audience does too, and I know Megan does. So thank you for being on our show today and for sharing all your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
And I'd like to also tell our audience members that today is the last day that Megan will be officially my co-host on the show on a regular basis, although I promise that we'll have her back on the Content Advantage in the near future. Megan, do you want to tell the audience really quickly what's going on, and then we'll move on to the closing?
Yeah, well, I mean, as they say, all good things come to an end. And for me, unfortunately, this is the really great thing that's coming to an end, but it's for a pretty great opportunity that I have. And so I will fill everyone in more detail on LinkedIn. So if anyone's curious as to where I'm heading, follow me on LinkedIn and you'll get all the details in the next couple weeks.
Awesome. Thank you. And then, of course, we'll share with you what we learned as well once it's time to share that information. All right. Yes. So our next show, I would like for you to join me on October the 12th. And let me show you a little bit here about who we're going to be speaking with. 2 weeks from now, I invite you to join me for a conversation with Liz Crow. She's the Director of Knowledge Management at the American online travel shopping company, Expedia Group. We're going to talk about how Expedia Knowledge Management's team provides technical content to both the company's business partners, those are like airlines, hotels, travel organizations, and tourism companies, and to its internal users, folks like the support center agents, so that they can ensure that every Expedia customer of theirs enjoys the same exceptional content experiences that the company promises its customers. So it'll be a very interesting show, and I hope you'll give it a whirl and join me for that show then. All right. And then, Megan, if you'll do our final reminder about the ratings, that'd be great.
Yes. Before you sign off, please give us a 5-star rating. Definitely add in to the comments what you loved, what you didn't like. Even though I won't be on the show, Scott will continue to read those and we'll make sure that he makes the show just better and better and better. So definitely fill that out. And Scott, thank you so much for all of your production work on this. It's been super fun. Carolyn, you're wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great working with you. And thank you, Carolyn, for your time today. And thank you to the audience members for consistently showing up.
Yes.
We've got 55,000 subscribers to our channel, and it's all because of you. So thank you very much. And let me know if you've got a topic that you'd like us to cover in the future, or like a double top secret guest that we're unaware of. We would love to be able to feature them on the show in the future. All right, without further ado, then I'm going to say you've been watching the Content Advantage Talk Show. Today's show has been recorded. Shortly after we sign off, the link that you're using to watch today's live program will turn into a link to a recording that you can watch or share with others, and we hope that you'll do that. On behalf of myself and Megan Gohuli, I'd like to say thanks for joining us for all these shows. We'll keep tabs on Megan, don't worry. And we'll give you some updates and bring her back, and we'll talk about some interesting things in the future. We hope you'll join us for all those shows. Until then, be safe, Be well and keep doing great work. Thanks for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Ensure your customers find the answers they need with Zoomin. Bring together product content from all teams and sources to deliver a unified, personalized content experience. Check us out at www.zoominsoftware.com.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.